We're here with Joanne Harris, author of Chocolat, The Lollipop Shoes, and her newest work, Blue-Eyed Boy on the Queen Mary 2. Welcome, Joanne.
Hi there.
Hi. In your lecture, you discussed how food evokes emotion and its universality. How does presentation, luxury, and setting of the food aboard the Queen Mary 2 evoke emotions for you as a writer?
Well, I think if people want to travel on an ocean liner, then obviously they have a certain view of the world, or they want a certain view of the world. And I think that that entails a certain level of luxury and presentation, and I think the food is presented to reflect that. So it's often quite splendidly old-fashioned food, things like baked Alaska, which I haven't had for absolutely years, and things like Chateaubriand steaks and this kind of thing, because people are buying into a kind of rather retro view of the world where eating takes time, where travel takes time. And I think, you know, that the kitchens have identified that and have played to it, and very successfully.
And how do you like the chocolate on here? We get chocolate all the time.
Oh, we get chocolate. I like everything. It's all very good. It's all very nicely presented. And I have to say, I'm a huge fan of whoever it is who carves the little vegetables and the melons and who makes the ice sculptures and this kind of thing, because there's obviously someone behind the scenes who's a real artist.
That's true. Food is becoming inextricably linked with travel and with literature. For example, on the Travel Channel, there's a lot of food shows. Do you believe food is a popular theme in literature, and do you think it will become more popular, like chocolat?
Well, I think it's always been popular. I think, you know, I've been very wrongly but flatteringly attributed this task of having sort of brought this food in fiction to popularity. This isn't at all true. Food has always had a place in fiction. And I think with its link to travel, I think it is one of the accessible ways of travelling, either, you know, of accessing a culture by embracing the food, or actually by travelling virtually, by reading about a culture. I think one of the things that you can respond to most readily is how people eat and how that affects, well, all sorts of things, from the welcome that you're given to the kind of things that are grown to the geography, the topography of the place, and all that is linked in with food.
That's true. And then, what is your favorite meal, and do you like to cook?
I do like to cook. My favourite meal will vary enormously depending on where I am and on the season. I do like to eat things in their seasons, and I like the sense of anticipation when something is approaching its season. And so, you know, that will vary very much at different types of place and times of year. I tend to like simple things that haven't been messed around too much, and so I eat a lot of fruit and vegetables at home, a lot of things that require minimal presentation. And this is good because I don't have a lot of time to cook very complicated things, and so I do cook, but it tends to be quick cooking, more assemblage than cooking, really.
Is there a French meal you enjoy and an English meal you enjoy the most?
Well, there are lots of things that I like for the sake of the nostalgia that they evoke, and when I'm in France, there are certain things that I will eat that I wouldn't necessarily eat anywhere else, and things like black pudding, for instance, which is a very Yorkshire thing, but I don't eat it in Yorkshire because I don't like Yorkshire black pudding. Right. I'm not used to it, so I would eat the French sort, and a certain kind of rye and buckwheat pancakes, which was always made in the place that my grandmother lived, and so you will have that, and that's a very traditional dish over there, black pudding, pancakes and apple. That's one of my all-time comfort foods.
Sounds good. Do you cook for your children? What's your favorite people to cook for? Your children or friends? Or?
Well, I cook for my family all the time. I very rarely have friends around for dinner parties, because when I do have friends around, we usually get a takeaway. But I cook for my husband and for my daughter, and because they are both vegetarians and have quite specific requirements, what I do tends to be limited to what they will eat, as opposed to, you know, special things that I might cook for myself. That doesn't happen.
Have you gotten very good at vegetarian dishes because of that?
They're very easy. I find they're very accessible, and a lot of people have this idea that vegetarian food is either dull or difficult, or somehow you have to think very hard. I don't find it difficult at all. I find it very easy to assimilate, and you know, most of the time I don't really miss the other stuff, except perhaps when I'm somewhere like this, where I get the chance to eat all kinds of things that I wouldn't normally.
Now I'm going to change gears a little bit, and I'd like to talk about the writing process. In your lecture, you had said, I write because I can't really not write. Since a lot of our audience are writers, Could you tell us about how you kept your ambition to become a published author despite all the rejections? And could you also tell us about your rejections culture?
Well, I don't really have any ambition. I'm not one of those ambitious people. I would have been very happy to keep on writing at whatever level I was able to. And it's obviously it's very nice to be published, but it's not something that I would have stopped doing just because rejection got on top of me, because publication was never my initial objective. I mean, you know, in my wildest dreams sometimes I used to think how wonderful it would be if I could write for a living and be paid for it, but not everybody gets the chance. So it was something that, you know, I was never really convinced that I was going to make it in any kind of meaningful way, and so I kept writing because I liked it and because I wanted to do it, and on some level I guess I had to do it. I think really I got into being published out of curiosity, because I thought, well, what if I do this, I follow this path, how far will it lead me? And I never really expected it to lead me to anything much. You know, my first book was published, I was absolutely delighted. I could quite easily have kept it at that level, but you know, I got lucky, and I eventually got a little bit better than just published. I actually got read by people, which is a nice thing. But yes, I collected quite enough rejection slips and letters, and helpful but not very helpful comments to actually make a sculpture. And it became a bit of a joke. The sculpture at some point was about 4 feet high. I was going to make it into a phoenix, which I would then set on fire as some sort of art installation. That never quite happened. I think it got rained on from a hole in the roof. But no, it was never something that I really expected seriously to do. And so every stage of the publication and the success of my various books has come as a bit of a surprise. Because I'm always expecting someone at the back of the room to go, that's not a proper author, that's just Mrs. Harris who used to teach me French.
Do you feel that the publishing industry today is very different from the one you started in?
It has changed quite a lot. It's not been that long, but it has changed immeasurably, I think. The whole business of e-books, for instance, has come out of nowhere, really, and continues to revolutionise publishing. But I also think that, you know, when I was first published, there was still only just, but there was still the net book agreement, which meant that books were sold at face value and never any less. And the collapse of the net book agreement meant that sales of books were made in a completely different way, and best-selling books could be sold at very, very small prices in supermarkets and this kind of thing, therefore introducing loss leaders and whole different cross-currents and dynamics in the whole book-selling market, which have now obviously changed the way books are acquired by publishers. And it's much, I mean, the bottom line is that it's much, much harder for the mid-list and the less successful, the less well-known author to actually manage to raise their head above the parapet. And as such, it's harder for a young author to get published without some kind of instant, recognisable commercial aspect to their work. Now, when I was starting off, that wasn't quite the case, and people were still quite ready to take a punt on something that might not be a huge commercial success. That doesn't happen so much now, very unfortunately, and I feel very sorry for all these young authors trying to break into publishing and feeling terribly frustrated because it is dominated by the same big names over and over.
Yes. And then, when a young author does get to that stage to get an agent, do you have any advice for them on how to get an agent, or how to find the right agent, or how to go about that?
I think the whole business of getting an agent is quite a personal thing, and it really depends on what an individual's requirements are. I have never wanted to be with a big agency, even now that I have the option. And I think initially I didn't have the option, but even now I want somebody that I can have a one-to-one personal relationship with, who is not just a colleague, but who can also be a friend, and who I don't have to make appointments with and meet behind a desk. Some people are completely the opposite, and they would like a kind of glorified bank manager, psychiatrist kind of person who they do make an appointment with, and who works mysteriously behind the scenes and who never keeps them abreast of anything. I would say, as a general piece of advice, it is useful to get an agent who is part of a professional agents association, because anybody can set up as an agent, but there are professional associations like the Association of Authors Agents who are there to put limitations on the power of an agent and what an agent can can bill you for instance. And so you know that the ones who are members of those organisations are subject to a certain level of scrutiny, let's say. And it's important to have someone you can get on with, I think. Because you are going to be with them a long time, hopefully.
Hopefully.
And you're going to pay them a lot of money, hopefully.
Yeah. And so I want to get back to a little bit about the writing process, because you had talked about how you like to write organically instead of planned. So I'd like you to elaborate on that a little bit, because I'm curious.
Well, I think generally speaking, there are two ways of approaching a book, and I have met people who work equally one way or the other. There is the kind of the industrial machinery layout option, whereby you have very carefully made plans and blueprints of your plot, and you know exactly how it's going to go, and you will spend 6 months plotting and the other 6 months actually writing everything that you know is already going to happen. And then there is the kind of general itinerary, sort of wandering through the woods and stopping here and there kind of way of writing, which is messy and which is my way, which I call organic, because you have a general trajectory for your plot, but you don't necessarily know what you're going to acquire and what might grow onto your plot and what you might decide needs adjustment. This is a messy way of writing, but it's the way I operate. I mean, I find that I'm very bad at following plans, and so my latest has been just not to have a plan at all, and to just see where the story leads me. And sometimes, you know, it needs cutting or it needs adjusting because it has got slightly out of shape. But the great thing about Microsoft Word is that actually you can do all these things and still come up with something that's relatively neat at the end of it. And the interesting thing about writing is that we all get to the same essential result, which is a book, in so many different ways, and there is no single right way to do it. There is a right way for me, there's a right way for you, or for any other writer, but it is not necessarily the same way.
That's true. To get back to your travels on the Queen Mary too, what do you think a community on a cruise ship is like? Since you talk about writing about small French communities and living in small French communities.
Well, I think any small community is interesting, and I've written about communities in France, in England, and on islands, in institutions like schools, and I think in many ways a liner like this is a very interesting study of a closed community, and would, I think, be very fruitful for somebody who wanted to write about something like that, because you do get a very strong sense of community. And you have lots of different little enclaves within the ship. You have entertainers, you have caterers, you have stewards, and of course you have the passengers, who are also grouped rather scientifically into little communities. And so you have basically what is a huge kind of conglomeration of little villages. And I think, you know, that there are quite intense relationships formed, and quite lasting ones. I've been talking to all sorts of people who've been coming year in, year out, meet the same people, enjoy joining this community for a relatively short time, and it's a great thing to do.
Do you join in the activities? I mean, when you're not speaking, do you get to join in?
Oh yeah.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, I do plenty, yes. I do all
Okay.
sorts of things, and the great thing is that there is something to suit a diversity of tastes, and there is no particular pressure to do any one thing.
Is there any activity you particularly enjoy?
Oh, I've enjoyed all kinds of things. I enjoy the music a great deal, and I followed some of the theatre, and I've seen a lot of the lectures. And as a matter of professional curiosity, I always go and see the authors. And
Yes,
so David Blunkett and Bill Bryson, I was at their lectures, and they were both excellent.
Yes.
I think with something like this, you have to walk the line between not feeling pressured to do absolutely everything, which will leave you exhausted, and just picking the things that you really like the look of.
What would you tell our audience about traveling aboard the Queen Mary too?
Well, I think some people approach it with preconceptions, which are not always particularly useful. I mean, for instance, this particular trip, a couple of friends of ours are here, and it took a very old friend of mine a long time to understand that he was the kind of person who could come, because he thinks he's not very posh, and he thinks that he'll not get on with people aboard, and he's had an absolutely fabulous time. You know, I've barely seen him, in fact, because he's been off socialising with his new Queen Mary friends, and I've hardly seen him at all. And I think it's very important to enjoy it and to relax and just to be yourself and to have fun, because this is what everybody does here.
Well, thank you for talking to us, Joanne.
It's
It's been a
pleasure.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.